welcome back to today's podcast. I'm your host, Audra Starkey. Today we're welcoming Nellie Barnett to today's podcast, who is a passionate German new medicine practitioner who from a very early age questioned conventional medical practices. Her curiosity led her to explore alternative approaches to health and well-being, so much so that in 2016, after completing her first extended fast, she discovered German new medicine, which empowered her to understand the root causes of discomfort and resolve health challenges naturally. Nellie is dedicated to helping people reclaim control over their health and find long-term healing at home through a deeper understanding of the mind-body connection. This was truly a fascinating conversation as it shines a light on a very different type of modality. And I love that we, towards the end of the podcast in particular, really focused on looking at German new medicine strategies for shift workers. So I really do hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello and welcome back to today's Healthy Shift Worker podcast. I have the lovely Nellie Barnett joining us today all the way from Perth or Western Australia, who is a German new medicine practitioner. So welcome, Nellie.
Thanks, Audra. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, and look, some of the things that I've started to do with my podcast, I guess in the last 12 months or so, is I've wanted to bring on different types of practitioners who just from different types of modality to kind of open our eyes a little bit in regards to what's actually out there as different ways to improve our health and well-being. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, I suppose, would you mind just sharing a little bit about your own personal journey and what kind of led you to becoming a German new medicine practitioner? Because I'm pretty sure that probably most people listening are going to have no idea what it is. So
yeah, it's pretty common. I would say it's probably gained popularity in like the last 4 to 5 years since the the good old COVID times.
Yep.
So yes, people are definitely starting to become familiar with it, but especially in Australia, it's still very young in, people being aware of it. So for me, with GNM in particular, it was a seed in a conversation about 10 years ago. I went to have a session with a kinesiologist who was a friend of my partner's, and we talked about multiple things, including prolonged fasting. So that actually led into my first prolonged fast, which was for an entire month in February 2016. And in that same conversation, he mentioned, and then there's, German new medicine. Have you heard about that? And I was like, no, what's that? And he just kind of gave me a little, elevator pitch. And I was like, hold on a second. What is this? And I just was immediately obsessed. And for me, it basically put into a really succinct language and scientific terminology what I had always felt intuitively and known intuitively, but not had the language for. So I describe it like coming home, because it was like someone had finally put a language and reasoning to everything that I had felt and known for a lifetime. So that was really the beginning, and I dove straight into just learning everything I could, self-study. And to be honest, it was pretty challenging to learn at that point in time, especially in Australia. Most of the teachings were happening in Europe, a little bit in the US and that kind of thing. But I really had to get stuck into self-study and just engaged in that, and then learnt from lots of different teachers around the world, and learnt so much just through observing my own health, my family's health. And I started weaving it into my work with clients straight away, which I found, really profound in observing the successes there too. Yeah. And I guess preceding that journey, I'd always been interested in the holistic health and wellness world from a really young age. And I had gone through lots and lots of particularly mental health challenges, different physical challenges, all sorts of things that I had always endeavored to resolve naturally. And so that interest was already there. And then, when I found German new medicine, I was just like, oh my goodness, this is it. This explains everything. So that was, that's kind of the short and sweet version of how I ended up here.
Yeah. And look, kudos to you, Nellie, for actually, being so open-minded. Because sometimes when we hear things for the first time, it's easy for us just to kind of shut it down. So, kudos to you to kind of, as you said, intuitively, it's like, I need to kind of know more about this. But would you mind, I guess, giving our listeners a little bit of an overview of what German new medicine is and how it differs from the mainstream allopathic medicine model that most people are familiar with?
Yeah, for sure. And I guess like you touched on something there as well. And I'd love to preface this conversation by just extending an invitation to receive this information with an open heart and open mind. I know that it's not going to be for everyone. It can be quite confronting the first time you hear it, but it's like, yeah, just come at it with an open heart and open mind. I always say, like, don't believe me or anyone or anything you actually hear, but give it an opportunity, like give it a chance and just observe it in your own life. Like, I don't actually want anyone to just go, I heard this thing and I believe it. I really encourage you to play with it, observe it in your own life. And that's where the proof in the pudding kind of comes from, I guess. So yeah, invitation to receive with an open mind and open heart. Take what's for you, leave what's not. And just let it kind of mull over in your body and mind. And, for me, it was just an immediate, sensation of like, this is it. This is absolute. But I know it's not that for everyone. Yeah, disclaimer there.
Yeah.
So German New Medicine, or traditionally better known as Germanische Heilkunde, which is basically like the art and science of healing, is kind of what it roughly translates to, which I think is really beautiful. And I guess the main way that it differs to the mainstream medical paradigm and even lots of other holistic alternatives out there is that we don't perceive symptoms to be something to fight. In the GNM GHK context, symptoms are part of meaningful and purposeful biological programs that run in the body, and they always have a purpose to assist the individual in a time of need. So the adaptations that happen on the organ level are always going to benefit the individual, and then symptoms are basically like an incidental part of that process and that program. So yeah, a lot of holistic modalities still see symptoms as something to fight, even if that is holistically and naturally, whereas GHK sees symptoms as something that's part of a program and something to understand and support the body through as opposed to fight. So that would be, I would say, the main big difference in terms of, between the mainstream medical paradigm. So to expand on that a little bit further, we have what's called 5 biological laws, and they are principles that underpin the whole basis and knowledge of German new medicine. And the first of those is that every symptom in the body is initiated by what we call a DHS. A DHS is a Dirk-Harmer syndrome, and that was named after, so it was Dr. Reichgerd Harmer who documented and discovered GNM GHK. It's not patented to anyone because it's not a therapy. It's not something we do to people. It's a body of knowledge. So Dr. Harmer documented and discovered it. So I guess we could call him the godfather. But, this is part of our primal blueprint, really, is what we're talking about here. And so Dr. Harmer's son, Dirk, was accidentally shot in the head and killed. And Dr. Harmer was a cancer specialist. And so shortly after Dirk's passing, Dr. Harmer discovered that he had testicular cancer. And he ended up having a series of dreams, premonitions, through which he came to understand or sort of like look at it wasn't just a coincidence. He discovered a connection there. And when he went back through his patient files, he discovered that in every single case, there was also a traumatic experience that preceded the showing up of the individual's cancer diagnosis. And what he discovered even further to that was that the nature of the conflict, of the trauma, of the event, and the way in which the individual perceived it determined what adaptations happened in the body, where they showed up, what program was set off. So that kind of leads into the first biological law, which is called the iron rule of cancer. And it's called that because originally Dr. Harmer believed that this applied to just cancers, but he went on to discover that it applies to basically every symptom, mental and physical, that we're aware of in the medical paradigm today. So the iron rule of cancer is that a DHS, like every biological program in the body, is set off by a DHS. It's an event that is shocking, isolating, and acute. So it's something that happens like quite quickly. It's not just a general built up stress. It's something that one wasn't expecting. There's no slow build up. it's acute, so there is a level of severity to it, and there is, again, that level of like, it happened right now, and the isolative piece. So in that moment, the individual perceived that they were all alone in the incident, that they didn't have any support network, and they didn't really have any resources to deal with the event. And so when those 3 criteria are met and that person is really caught off guard, caught on the wrong foot, didn't see it coming, then it's like basically the body takes over and says, here, I'm going to help solve that for you instead, because you believe that you have no resources to solve the issue. And so what happens is that the psyche, the brain, and the organ are impacted simultaneously. On the level of the brain, it will show up with what we call the Harmer herd, which is like a set of concentric rings, kind of like ripples in a pond. And there's actually a marking on the brain that appears when someone experiences this DHS moment. And that marking on the brain corresponds, it lands on the relay that corresponds to the organ in the body that is needed to help the individual through that event. So Dr. Harmer also mapped out all the different relays in the brain and what organ is controlled from where, which is not something that the mainstream medical's done either. So he mapped it really precisely. So yeah, and that's an absolutely fascinating process to go through. So I'm so grateful to have a really amazing relationship with working relationship with a CT scan reader. There's not a lot of them in the world at the moment. This reader is over in Europe, and I've been fortunate enough to sit in on quite a few consults now and see directly these markings on the brain that exactly correspond to the maps that Dr. Harmer produced of the brain, which is just like, it doesn't get more scientific and more provable than that, in my opinion. And those will also match the symptoms that the individual is experiencing. So, for example, when I had my CT read, I didn't tell the consultant much about what I was experiencing, and the consultant was, from the brain scan, able to tell me pretty much every symptom that I know I've been experiencing throughout, everything that's active. So yeah, that was really, really fascinating. So that's the first biological law of cancer, and that's, I guess the starting point for GNM, GHK.
Yeah. That was actually, one of my next questions was actually to run through those biological laws. So I'm glad that you started with one, which is extraordinary, fascinating. And I love the take on it is in regards to the symptoms as well, because I truly believe in some way the symptoms can be partly the cure. Like, our body never attacks itself. I think that's another misguided thing that we've possibly been taught, or because it doesn't make sense. Why would the body attack us?
Correct.
It does not make sense. So
it doesn't make evolutionary sense, right? No. The body wants to survive. It's always looking out for us. And these are, basically evolutionary adaptation processes.
Absolutely, which opens up the whole minefield of autoimmune diseases as looking at that very differently. But we won't go on to that topic. That's probably a podcast in its own outright. Yeah, but could you please keep going with those biological laws, because that is obviously the framework to German medicine.
Yep. So first biological law is, it's initiated by a DHS, a moment that catches the individual off guard. It impacts the psyche, brain, and organs simultaneously, and the biological program sets in motion. So then we've got the second biological law, which is the law of 2 phases. And this is where we understand that each biological program runs in 2 distinct phases if it's completely resolved. Now, if it's not, and I'll get to that in a moment, we can have like relapses or a hanging healing where we keep getting triggered on the same program and there's a partial resolution, but it's not fully resolved. And this will create basically ongoing chronic conditions. This is what's in play there. So the 2 phases are effectively conflict active phase and healing phase. So conflict active phase starts the moment that the individual, and actually I'll say individual because it's not just people, this applies to animals as well. And I believe that we will see in the future that it also applies to like plants and basically every living thing. So yeah, the two phases, you've got conflict active phase starts the moment that the individual is caught off guard. That's the DHS moment. That puts us into conflict activity. And here we're going to be basically predominantly in the sympathetic nervous system state. So this is fight and flight. We're going to experience things like cold extremities, sleeplessness, a lowered appetite, that general feeling of like stress and being highly strung. We might be compulsively thinking about the event. The sleeplessness often occurs between like 1 to 3, 2 to 4 a.m. is the classic time for waking up. And the purpose of that is to have more waking hours to solve the issue. The brain's and psyche's trying to be like, let's work this out. So sleeplessness is a common one. And then what will happen on the level of the organ is one of 3 adaptations will start. So the organ that's involved in the biological program will either undergo cellular loss, cellular proliferation, so addition of cells, or functional loss. The function will change. And they're part of the biological program. And some programs hold their purpose in conflict active phase. Some programs hold their purpose in healing phase. So it's very much embedded in like embryology and the different germ layers. So we've got the brain stem endoderm, we've got the mesoderm, new and old mesoderm, and then we've got the endoderm, which is the sort of like the newest tissue, and it's broken down into those. Did I say ectoderm for the brainstem? I hope I did. Ectoderm, mesoderm, and then endoderm, brain, mesoderm is the middle, new and old tissues, and then
I think we'll get there.
ectoderm is the newest tissue. And the way I remember that actually is the endoderm is the oldest tissue, and it's like, if we think about, so GHK sees that we started as a single cell organism. So it does play into evolution. And basically when we first formed, we were one cell and then we split. So I remember endoderm as the oldest tissue because end to end were attached. Endoderm, brainstem, end to end were attached.
Mm-hmm.
And then we split open and turned into the fetus shape and started evolving from there. It's another whole big conversation, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so you've got the 3 tissue layers, or 4 kind of, because you've got new and old mesoderm, and there is also a little bit of midbrain tissue in the brainstem as well, but I won't get into those technicalities right now. So one of 3 things starts happening dependent on the embryological layers. So yeah, the cells will either add cells, degrade cells, or the function will change of the organ. And so for something like the lung alveolar tissue is brainstem endoderm tissue, and that responds to what we call a death fright conflict. And so when that conflict is active, basically the individual has perceived that their life is under threat, and our most important morsel to sustain life is air, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the alveoli will start proliferating and adapting in response to a death fright conflict so that the individual can better take in and process more air and oxygen, which effectively helps the individual survive longer in the event of a death fright conflict where they believe that their life is under threat. So that's the purpose that happens in conflict activity, and that's the purpose. Then something like mesoderm tissue, we've got purpose at the end of the healing phase. So the mesoderm tissue, the new mesoderm tissue covers, so one of them is a self-devaluation conflict, right? The self-devaluation conflict is kind of like a gym workout, basically. The self-devaluation conflicts cover all of the musculoskeletal system. So muscles, bones, joints, tendons, ligaments. It also relates to blood and lymph system too. And a self-devaluation is anything where we perceive that we're not good enough. So it's like not strong enough, not fast enough, not smart enough, not enough. Now, why do we go into the gym to do a workout? We go in because we perceive ourselves to be not good enough somehow, right? Like we want to be stronger, we want to be faster, we want to be better. So we go in and we do a workout, and during that workout, it's common knowledge that we break down muscle tissue, which is what happens in the conflict active phase of a self-devaluation program. The tissue breaks down. And then we also know that after a gym session, we go into recovery, and it's in the recovery that the purpose of the gym session comes through, right? Because it rebuilds the tissue to be better and stronger than before. And this is the same thing that happens in the healing phase of a musculoskeletal self-devaluation conflict, is that the tissue builds to be better, stronger, more than before, which serves the purpose of basically effectively like negating the self-devaluation. So we perceived we weren't good enough in the moment of DHS, and then at the end of the program, the tissue is better, stronger than before and more capable, and therefore your sense of self-capability value goes up, right?
Yeah.
So that's a couple of examples. So yeah, conflict active phase, one of the three things starts happening. We're in sympathetic nervous system state. And then the moment that we resolve the issue, the moment of resolution, then we tip over and we go into PCL, healing phase, post-conflict lysis. And this has got kind of three phases to it. It's got PCL-A, epicrisis, and PCL-B. And the healing phase is conducive with the parasympathetic nervous system. So it's rest and digest. We're fatigued, we're warm, there's fevers, headaches, microbial activity. This is where we start to feel pretty rubbish. This is where most of the symptoms show up. There's actually not too many programs that show symptoms in conflict activity. Most of the time, we're already in PCL when we experience the symptoms. And what's happening here on the level of the organ is that whatever adaptations happened in conflict activity, the opposite happens in PCL. So if there was cell loss, the cells rebuild. If there was cell proliferation, the cells degrade. And if there was functional loss, the function returns in most cases. And I say most cases because sometimes it does go too far that the body does have a little bit of trouble recovering, or if we've used medication to, say, prop something up, then it can be quite hard for the body to recover that properly as well. So there's a few caveats there, but the functional adaptation is not relative to too many programs either. It's usually cell loss or cell proliferation. So the opposite happens in PCL, and the body either starts breaking down the tissue or rebuilding the tissue or returning function. And so yeah, that's PCL phase. So you've got PCL-A is like the start of the healing phase. The epicrisis is quite important because this is where most people tap out. This is where most people are like, oh my goodness, I'm so sick. Like, this hurts so much. Give me the antibiotics, give me the medication, give me the surgery, give me the treatment, give me the chemo.
Yeah.
Like, things get pretty bad here sometimes.
Yeah.
And if you can make it over that hump and come down into PCLB, PCLB is like the tail end of healing phase. This is kind of like when we're in bed after the flu, as it may be called, and we're like feeling better. We've come over that hump. We've gone through the fever, and we're like, the appetite's starting to return. We're kind of like, give me a bowl of that chicken soup, and I just want to stay in bed rugged up and watch some TV. And I'm getting better, but I still don't feel great. That's kind of PCLB. And then, yeah, if we can make it through that, then provided there's no relapses or tracks, then the program completes. And that's the end of the biological program. And we go back to our normal circadian day-night rhythm of sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system. So that's the second biological law. Any questions on that before I jump into the next couple?
Just listening to you talking, Nellie, it's, I think every single person on the planet has experienced what you've just described. And it's so interesting to hear, as you said, particularly from a treatment perspective, we feel like we need our bodies going through this process, and we need to see somebody to get something to suppress these symptoms.
Yeah.
When, as you said, if you can hang on and just let the body just kind of heal itself, do its thing, it can help to correct itself. So
Correct.
Completely fascinating stuff. So yeah, no, please keep going.
Yeah, awesome. And look, we do, even in GNM, GHK, we do say sometimes there is a time and place for intervention, right?
Of course.
Sometimes programs go too far, and we do need to look at surgery or look at some kind of treatment or bring down microbial activity with a low dose of antibiotics to keep the person comfortable. There is a time and place, but it's just a completely different understanding of when and where that time and place is, and also how it's done. So, in the GHK sort of view, we would operate on some things quite differently, and we would treat things quite differently, and there are different things we'd do to keep someone comfortable. So yeah. So the next couple of laws I'll run through quite quickly. They are actually quite complex, but I think they're going to be too much for today.
And it can be difficult too, like trying to break complex things down into layman's terms as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So the third biological law is what we call the ontogenetic system of biological programs. And this is where we understand, it's kind of going back to those embryological layers. So yeah, the brainstem and the endoderm and the mesoderm and the ectoderm, and how they all have really distinct patterns. So I touched on this earlier, but it's like some of these germ layers proliferate tissue in conflict active phase. Some of them degrade tissue and then rebuild in PCL healing phase. And so, yeah, they each have their specific patterning and they follow that patterning to a T. And so depending on what germ layer is involved, there's a really distinct way that that will play out in terms of cell degradation and cell repair, or vice versa, or functional loss. So like I said, I won't go too deep into that one because it's really complex and it's got a beautiful map of patterning in terms of how they all respond. And then the fourth biological law kind of adds on to that. The third, fourth, and fifth, I find really add on to each other. So we're really looking at that patterning of the ontogenetic system and the embryological layers. And yeah, so fourth biological law looks at the ontogenetic system of microbes. So this is about the role of microbes in these programs as well. And basically it structures or like helps us understand what kinds of microbes become involved in the different germ layers of the embryological system. And this is probably the law that most people have the hardest time getting their heads around, because it basically dismisses contagion and germ theory. And so we come to understand that illness is not, and microbes don't cause illness. They have a job to do. They're part of the biological programs and they're there for a reason. So yeah, it can be a really, really confronting one to come up and hear this, but it's kind of like, what do they say? Like, correlation is not causation. Right. And up until this point in time, what's happened is that we've always seen microbes at the site of issues in the body. So they're maybe there with degradation, or they're there with cellular repair, and they're there with discharge and these sorts of things. So we've assumed that they are the cause of the issue. Much like if there was some aliens hanging out up there and they were looking down on Earth and they saw all these firemen at fires, or they saw all these road workers at holes, doing works and holes in the ground. And they were like, well, those guys must have caused that because they're there all the time. And that's kind of what we've done with microbes. We've gone, oh, they're always there when that ulceration's going on, or when that, discharge is there. And we've assumed that they're responsible for it. But GNM GHK sees that they're there as part of the process. They're there to do a job. And they're actually part of either, again, depending on which embryological layer we're looking at, they're either helping rebuild the tissue or they're helping degrade the tissue that was added in conflict active phase. So that's, a little snippet on the fourth biological law, the ontogenetic system of microbes. Again, like I said, these are quite complex laws, so I won't go too deep into them today. And then the fifth biological law builds on that again. So this is called the quintessence. And this is where we understand that each of these biological programs, like I touched on before, has a really specific biological purpose, and it actually assists the individual in what they've perceived they couldn't get through. And further to that, again, there's patterning in terms of the embryological layers and where the purpose sits. So some embryological layers, like I said, have their purpose in conflict active phase, some have it in healing phase, and vice versa. So yeah, that's the quintessence. It's really about understanding that, like Dr. Harmer said, nature doesn't make mistakes, we spoke on, this is evolution, this is adaptation, this is, a species that wants to survive, as every species does, and as every species can basically experience the same adaptation. So that's the quintessence. I really love the quintessence as a biological law because it's really the one that I think I said in the beginning, that's the one that really sets GNM GHK apart from the mainstream paradigm, is that we see that these biological programs are purposeful and they're looking to assist the individual rather than harm, hurt, or, cause death of the individual. And it goes the same for mental health programs as well. Again, it's another really complex thread of GNM GHK. But when we look at the behavioral outcomes of all the mental health challenges, again, they're solving, there's a purpose. They're going towards solving the issue for the individual. So if we look at something like megalomania, for example, which could be described as someone who thinks they know it all, is really big-headed, knows all the answers, comes across as super confident or really arrogant. Megalomania is the result of multiple self-devaluation conflicts, particularly in the realm of emotional and academic intelligence. So how does the behavioral outcome of being really like big-headed and know-it-all and confident solve a intellectual and emotional self-devaluation? It's effectively putting the person up on this self-proclaimed pedestal to be like, it's like overcoming the sense of lowered self-worth, self-value, self-esteem issues, right? So that's the behavioral outcome. So yeah, again, we call them constellations, and they're a collection of conflicts that mark the brain in a certain pattern and result in a certain behavioral outcome that is, like I said, in line with the quintessence, always going to serve the individual in some way. That's the 5 biological laws in a nutshell.
In a nutshell. As you said, you probably could talk about it for 10 hours
Yeah.
because that can be go. But I mean, if you take a step back, and I loved how when you were mentioning about the microbes, Nellie, for those who have been following my podcast for a while, a few episodes back, I actually interviewed a former lecturer of mine who's since published a book called Can You Catch a Cold? Untold Human Experiments and History, and he talks exactly along that line. And I was going to use the fireman analogy in regards to microbes too. We just assume because they're there, they're the cause of it, but when it's actually the opposite, they're actually there to help. But as you said, it's a bit of brain gymnastics has to go on to kind of really start to go, okay, it's all that learning, unlearning, relearning. And as you beautifully articulated at the beginning of the podcast, we just need to be open-minded about things. And as you said, let it simmer a little bit. Don't take our word for it. Go off and do your own further research. But I think we're living in very exciting times at the moment, because all of these new things are, science or old science is actually starting to come out more. Yeah, which is great. Gives other people different alternatives in their search for healing. But one question I guess I would like to ask Nellie, like, how does, in all of what you've sort of just spoken about, how does mindset fit into this when it comes to, when you're getting your clients on board and helping them through when you're working with them?
Yeah. Are you talking about mindset in terms of like a general thing, or in terms of part of the resolution, or in terms of part of being open to the work?
A second and third, I suppose. Yeah, being open to this and as in a different type of healing. Yeah.
Yeah, if I start with that piece, like being open to it, I think that kind of just comes back into what I said at the beginning. Like, I don't expect anyone to believe me on this. From my perspective, this is just how the body works, though. So, and that's the view of GNM, GHK. It's like, you don't actually need to believe in this for it to work, because we're not doing anything to you. This is the natural biological processes of the body. Like, as far as I'm concerned, this is how our body works. So you will have to figure out like whether that's true for you or not. But effectively, it's not like something, like I guess like kinesiology or Reiki, and I'm no way bad mouthing these. I love them as modalities, but there does have to be that level of, I guess, like conviction and belief in what's happening for it to be really beneficial. Like, the person has to be quite on board with it.
Yeah.
Whereas GNM GHK is not a therapy as such. It's not something we do to people. It's a body of knowledge. And so it's more about observing it in play. And the 4th biological law of microbes is one that I would really say, like, just observe it. And what I can say from experience is that it's completely changed in our family. It's very, very rare that we actually have the same symptoms at the same time anymore, because we have an awareness. And it's often the fear of contagion that sets programs in motion, right? And so as soon as we started stepping out of that paradigm, we noticed that it's very rare that we have symptoms at the same time. Very rare that we're all, say, vomiting or have a cold or these sorts of things, because we understand that we're like, oh, okay, that's theirs. They had an experience. It's not something I can catch. Unless we all had an experience at the same time that we perceived in the same way, then the family might experience symptoms at the same time. But yeah, so it doesn't even have to be a mindset of belief. It's just like, observe it or don't. And I know that not everyone's going to be ready for it. Like I know that I've been in this 10 years and I've experienced the full spectrum of, all sorts of things that can come up when I share this information. And then I guess in terms of mindset, like how does mindset tie into this as in like the healing terms and resolution, that sort of
Yeah.
thing? Certainly we see the importance of like cultivating a resilient mindset. So understanding that like a DHS occurs based on the context of the event, but also the way in which the person perceives the event. So if you're someone who's easily caught off guard, easily offended, easily shocked, someone who's really highly strung and is always like waiting for the next thing, someone who does feel really isolated, then the potential is that you're going to be quite a lot more susceptible, I guess, to being caught off guard and meeting those three criteria of the DHS, like isolated, acute, shocked. And it can also really, I think, biological programs and prolong how things go. So I would say mindset is important in that context of developing a resilient mindset. And this was something that was on my mind, knowing coming into this podcast, which is, your whole thing has been around shift work, right? Originally. And how can that interact? I would say a similar thing. What like we had this, so my partner works FIFO, so there's kind of a shift work thing going on there. But he also he tried to come home at one stage and he did some shift work where it was like proper shift work, working at night and sleeping in the day. And he was a mess and his mindset was not good. So I would perceive that he was probably during that, and he did get sick a lot more during that time. And I believe it's because you're sort of like in a much more, unless you manage things really, really well with shift work, the danger, I don't like to use that word, but the danger is that you don't have as resilient a state of mental capacity. And so it does kind of put you in that place where perhaps you are more easily shocked, you are more easily offended, you're not so well adept to deal with things. So that's where I would say that interaction comes in. I'm not saying it's going to be the same for everyone. I think some people, just soldier on and get it done and, have ways that they manage their shift work really well or manage sleeplessness really well. But I also know, like, from the point of view as a mother being sleep deprived in early years, like, I definitely know that my mental state was nowhere at the level of resilience that I have when I'm a well-slept human.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
things like that. And then we can, we could even go down a rabbit hole of like, why do some people work so much? And there can be conflicts and constellations in play that drive certain characters that result in certain behavioral outcomes like that as well. So it's kind of another tangent. We won't go there right now. But yeah, that's kind of how I would say mindset interacts in that context, and also then mental resilience as a part of that kind of subject. And then when we're looking at, so a resolution happens in one of two ways to a biological program. It can either happen as a practical change or a perceptual change. And Dr. Harmer said we always want to try and facilitate the practical change first. This is a literal change in our lives so that the psyche is convinced that, oh, that can never happen again. Like, I'm good. That problem is resolved, we're done, we're dusted, we're good.
Yeah.
In lieu of that, or if that is not available, then we can look at perceptual change. And this is where like probably the like juiciest, my most enjoyed part of the work is in helping people create the changes. We obviously look at practical changes first, but I do love helping people facilitate perceptual change. And even if we're able to practice this in general life context, I believe it puts us in a far more mentally resilient state. And by shifting the way that we see things and experience things in life, I've seen so many biological programs just unravel naturally as part of that process of changing, like, effectively how we respond to life at a core. At a core. That's the part of the work that I really, really enjoy. I call myself a perceptual change nerd. Martini is what I use predominantly, the philosophy predominantly in that context. Love it. So does that sort of explain the mindset piece?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, we're kind of wanting to instill that behavioural change in amongst our clients to get the results that they're wanting, and that can be a bit of a craft in itself. Meeting the person where they're at and so forth. I'd love then to, and I appreciate your mention about the resilience thing, because I think, majority of shift workers are incredibly resilient people. It takes a very special human being, I've always said this, to actually do shift work.
Yeah.
Being up at stupid o'clock when everyone else is sleeping and juggling it. It's not easy. It's really hard. And I truly do believe it. We're not meant to be doing this, and we are in survival mode. And I've mentioned, I try to believe, I've had other people say that we can thrive when working shift work. I truly don't believe, because we're not biologically programmed, but we can survive. But I guess that survival mechanism can be a little different.
And these are people, I would say, like, the mindset work piece is really important for shift workers to maintain that level of resilience and make sure they're getting nurtured in all the ways that they need, because it is operating outside of our biological norm. Like, that's how it is. So, in understanding that, then, you definitely want to be looking after the brain and the psyche and doing whatever you can to stay in a good state.
Absolutely. And I think that also comes down to, like, if you're somebody that absolutely loves your job, whether it's a nurse or your pilot or whatever, and then the shift work part you can put up with because you just love the job. But if you're working shift work and you hate the job, you really don't enjoy it, then that's where perhaps might need to make some changes and think a few things through. But I'd love to, I guess, let's talk about one thing that some of my clients often experience is the likes of headaches. What do you do? What does a bit of a consultation look like if someone was to come to you, Nellie, with unresolved headaches? How does that look from a German new medicine perspective protocol?
Sure.
If it's a protocol or not.
So headaches are really interesting because they don't have one specific biological program behind them.
Okay.
They are a symptom that tends to occur in the PCL healing phase, and there can be several programs that are attached to headaches. It depends on the quality of the headache, where it is, what kind of pain it is, those sorts of things. So basically, when somebody comes to me with headaches, one of the first things I do is get really clear on the timeline. So, at home, you can start to keep a diary. When do they come? When do I experience them? What time of day it is? What day is it? What have I been doing? Who's around? And just really notice what's happening in life and what's in your environment when the headaches occur. And then, get clear on the quality of them. So are they front? Are they back? Are they eyes? Are they in the neck? Is it like a cold headache or a hot headache? Is it a dull, throbbing, continual headache? Is it a sharp headache? And then that kind of information will really direct us to understand what program it's linked to. One of the most common headaches is what people would generally call a migraine. And this is commonly related to a frontal fear. So we can get a frontal fear and we can get a fear from behind. And a frontal fear is basically like something was coming at me. I had danger coming at me. So classically, I think of like, a child with a dog that they've bent down to pat the dog, and all of a sudden the dog's like right at them. That could be considered a frontal fear. But it could also be like a person or anything that's perceived dangerous. Like it could be a boss getting up close and personal in your face, those sorts of things. Sometimes people associate it with things like governments or authorities as well. So that's quite a common one. But the thing is, like, GNM looks at the individual. We really break down the individual's experiences, the symptoms, what they're going through. Diagnosis labels don't mean so much to us. We really want to treat the individual, which is another thing that's quite different to mainstream. Mainstream will tend to clump a heap of symptoms into a box and slap a label on it. And we really look at the context of the individual's experience. First we would need to get clear on the timeline and the quality of the headache, what it's really like, and then we would start to look at, okay, what biological program is driving this. We might also look at what other symptoms you're experiencing, and that could give us some clues as to what biological program is in play. We could always go down the route of the CT scan if things are really severe and it's necessary, and then we'll be able to see precisely from the brain scan what program is causing the headache. And then from there, we would move to understanding the resolution. So, okay, now we know the biological program. From the CT scan, if we went that way, we would often be able to tell roughly when it started, so we could look at what was happening in life around that time as well, and then we would seek to create either that practical change or the perceptual change if it's appropriate. So that's briefly what a flow of consultations might look like.
Fascinating, yeah, and so very different to most consultations that people would be used to, because you're asking a plethora of different types of questions, which is great.
Lots of questions.
Yeah.
Especially detective work, which is fascinating, because when I was a kid, I wanted to be a detective. That was one of my things I wanted to do. And now I'm like, hey, look, here I am being a little health detective.
Without your magnifying
Just
glass.
becoming your own health detective is a great thing to do at home. Like, start keeping a record of when, like, what's going on in life and when symptoms happen. I think it's really important to keep records for our kids, knowing this information, so that they can potentially look back when they're older, because as an adult who didn't have this information growing up, it can be really challenging to look back sometimes and try and remember. So some of those key points for our kids can be really amazing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So for any of our listeners, Nellie, that might be interested in maybe, pursuing or learning more a little bit about German new medicine, what approach would you recommend that they do?
Yeah, so it depends if the individual is interested in like self-study version, which is obviously probably going to be the longer version, or if they want to jump in with someone like myself and learn in in an environment that's supported and guided. So the best place to go if you just want to kind of dip a toe in and have a look at some free resources and that sort of thing. I've got a bit on my website, but the best free resource is 100% learninggnm.com, which is run by a woman called Caroline American. She was a first-hand student of Dr. Harmer, and her information on there is fairly accurate. There's been some discrepancies, a little bit here and there, and it is a very technically thick site, so it can be quite challenging for some people to go on there and just like, oh my goodness, what is this? This is too much. So just a warning there, but it is hands down the best publicly available free resource. So learninggnm.com. And then obviously I've got my foundations course, which is it's 6-7 modules, but it's lifetime access, because I don't actually believe that you can learn this stuff in 6 or 7 weeks. I'm 10 years deep in learning and applying this knowledge, and I still learn more and more every day. I learn more through seeing clients. I learn more through observing my own family. I learn more through different mentors that I come in contact with. I've got a brilliant one at the moment, all those sorts of things. So I offer lifetime access because it's something you come in and out of and learn as you want to. And, when you or your family has a symptom, you can come in and suss it all out and work through it. I've got lots of resolution tools in there, and we have regular calls so that you can be supported and guided in that process as well. And in those calls, we often practice in real time a lot of those perceptual change techniques, which is super fun as well. So there are some great places to start. If anyone loves books, I don't have a copy right here at the moment, but I've got a couple of great books on my site. Lars Kronlob is one of them. He does just a really great, concise, 5 biological laws and overview of GNM, GHK. So that's a really great place to start. Yeah. And then the website, Amici de Dirk, is like Dr. Harmer's original publishing house websites. There's lots of books and resources on that site as well if you wanted to get more into the sort of technical side of GNM, GHK. And then following on from all of that, then I do have a practitioner level course as well. So that's for people who are either already holistic practitioners and want to integrate GNM into the work that they're doing and look at how that all acts together. So kinesiologists, Reiki, breathwork, osteos, chiropractors, physiotherapists, massage therapists, like anyone who's working with health holistically it's a really, really valuable course. Or if somebody is wanting to step into that space, then we go right from ground as well. So that would be the next level.
Yeah, and you obviously offer one-on-one consultations for clients and patients. So how do people go about getting quote some of those websites that you've mentioned, but how do people get hold of you, Nellie? I assume you've got obviously you've got your own website.
Got my website, which is nelliebewell.com.au. We're just actually revamping that one at the moment. So it is still live, but yeah, doing a nice refresher on it.
Yep.
And I'm fairly active on Instagram as well. So Nellie_New Earth Wellness. And you can just fill out the application form to apply for one-on-one. And at this stage, like we're recording in late November, at this stage, I'm actually booked out until the start of 2025 at this stage, which is amazing. But yeah,
No.
just a heads up to jump
Mhm.
on the application if you are keen on working in that capacity. I
Mhm.
can arrange CT scan consults as well, which is amazing for chronic
Mm.
conditions or the more sort of serious diagnosis. And that's just such an invaluable resource that I'm so grateful for. And then if there is, if there's emergency cases, I do tend to make room and time for to assist those people. But yeah, love working one-on-one with people as well. And I do have, lots of consultants in training as well through my practitioner integration course, and hopefully have a directory of other people that can really assist in depth in that way soon as well.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, it definitely sounds like it's going to be growing more and more in interest and gain a lot more traction, as you said, particularly in the last few years, 4 to 5 years
Yeah,
specifically.
and I just think there's so much more we have to learn as well. Like, yeah, I feel like GNM is really in its infancy, even though it's so
Mm.
detailed, it's still in its infancy. And even, in the last few years, I've learnt so much about different threads of GNM that can assist, like everything from relationships. There's a whole field around biological relationships now that's like relationships from a GNM perspective, and the masculine and feminine dynamics, and children with behavioral issues. And yeah, there's so many different tangents that GNM can assist with. So yeah, I think it's an amazing, amazing body of work, and I'm extremely grateful to have been introduced to it, and just indefinitely indebted and grateful for the work of Dr. Harmer putting it all together and documenting it as thoroughly as he did.
And kudos to you as well, Nellie, for embracing it and
Thank you.
being so keen and interested in it. So no doubt that you've been helping a lot of people and continue to do so. And it's wonderful that you're building a bit of a practitioner network as well to
Thank you.
spread the to be able to, for more people to be able to get in contact. So is there any before we wrap up the podcast, is there any parting comments that you would like to say, perhaps something that I might have missed in regards to a question, or something that you think that our listeners might benefit from?
There's so much more. But
We
I
don't
think
want a
the
5-hour
biggest,
podcast.
right? But I think the biggest one is just play with it, just observe it, just come in, like I said at the beginning, with that open mind, open heart, and go, I wonder, what if? And start having
Yeah.
a look at your timeline of life events and symptoms, and just get
Mm.
curious about patterns in that, and connections in that sense. And yeah, like the mindset piece as well, perceptual change, and really looking at mindset and perceptual change is going to assist you whether it resolves biological programs or not. So one of the biggest things I've noticed through working with GNM GHK is that, like, the most beautiful thing about it is that when we work with a symptom and a biological program to change, we're effectively coming into that to change the physical symptom. But what I've observed over the years is that the work it takes, and the exploration it takes, and the self-assessment and responsibility it takes to change that physical symptom ends up resulting in the most amazing life changes and personal evolution. And that's probably been one of the most fulfilling parts of my work to date, is witnessing so much like deep, deep transformation in people because of following the path of physical symptoms. And this really, for me, plays into that fifth biological law of quintessence as well, where it's like basically divine timing and order in all things, in all of the natural world. And yeah, the way that things play out, it's just, been incredible to observe that within my clients and students as well.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think just to wrap up what you've just said is for us to have an appreciation that I think our bodies truly are brilliant,
Yeah,
and they have an amazing capacity to heal given the right conditions. And
absolutely.
I think they're not, our bodies aren't broken, but our environment very much is in a lot of cases. And I love that the work of GNM is that it is looking at it from that take, and embracing the, not to suppress the symptoms, let them come out and
Yeah.
let them show, and
Yeah,
and
let them bring their lessons to you.
yeah, exactly. It's a bit of a clue to go, something's not quite right, isn't it? What might that
100%.
be, and what can I do? Yeah.
Yep.
Well, this has been
Amazing.
a great chat, Nellie. Thank you so very much for joining me. Yeah, and I'm sure our listeners have really enjoyed our conversation as well. And yeah, thank you again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Audra.
That's it for today's podcast. Thank you so very much for listening. I look forward to seeing you for the next one.